Okay, welcome back everybody. Great to see you all for our final session of the day. As we've heard already, digital transformation is not a one-time event. It's a journey that is critically important for every organization as they look to facilitate smarter ideas, faster executions, and greater innovation at every stage. It's critical for business and technology leaders to have the right strategy and talent in place so that transformation can happen quickly, securely, and at scale. But what are some of the cutting-edge technologies being applied to unleash value now and enable our people to do their best work? To find out, let's welcome our final guests today. The brilliant Briana Frank, VP for Product Management at IBM Cloud, and Randy Arseneau, Global Market Development Executive for IBM Storage. Folks, thank you so much for joining us here today. It's great to see you and look forward to the conversation.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Thank you for having us.
No, absolute pleasure. Listen, we're going to be diving into lots of digital transformation chat, battle stories that you have, successes, pitfalls. Folks, if you do have any questions for our final speakers, for Briana and Randy, then do let us know. You've been keeping Lucy busy all day, so let's keep that going right up until the end of the sessions here in the studio. Just let her know if you have a question and we will bring you up as soon as possible. Before we go any further, let's maybe just do some super quick introductions. Briana, I'll come to you first. Who are you in 30 seconds or less, if we may, and where does your responsibility lie?
Absolutely. So I work in IBM Cloud. I run product, and I kind of think of myself as an entrepreneur. I really enjoy building new products, listening to our client needs, and launching them into the world and helping them grow and helping our clients grow at the same time.
Yeah, great. We can dig into how exactly you're doing that further into the session. And Randy, let's hear from you.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm in the product management side of the house for IBM Technology, specifically the storage portfolio, and I kind of cover portfolio strategy, evangelism, do some AR, PR work, a little bit of everything. So I'm kind of a SWAT team guy for the storage brand, I guess.
Yeah, great. Okay, many thanks both. So I want to start with a question to get a sense of where some of the challenges lie. We've been talking all week about the need to drive transformation and that idea of momentum, how we kind of create this critical mass behind transformation efforts. Still remains challenging in lots of organizations, getting projects over the line, maybe industrializing them. Where are you seeing the biggest challenges in driving the transformation effort at the organizations that you work with and indeed at your own organization? Perhaps I can start with you, Briana, if I may, with that one.
Absolutely. So, I think that what we're seeing is a massive change, and it's really being driven by human behavior. And so if you kind of take in, for an example, in Brazil, 45 million people in Brazil did not have a bank account at all. And if you think about the spectrum of individuals and human behavior, you've got not having a banking account on one side, and the other side would be embracing mobile payments and transactions as if it's something that you do day in and day out. And what we saw in the pandemic is those individuals went from not having a bank account to having 75 million transactions a day. And this is just with one bank that we've partnered with, Bank of Bradesco. And so that massive human behavior change requires a technology change. And so now all of a sudden the bank has to scale at unprecedented levels, but do so in a way that's really taking into account security and compliance. And especially in the financial industry, being compliant and innovating it can be very challenging. And so that's some of the things that we see. And then when you're dealing with really sensitive personal data and you're dealing with bank account data, you need to make sure that data is safe and secure. And then the location of that data, like where does that data reside? Is it on-prem? Is it in the cloud? And then from there, what's the latency look like? How, of course, we as individuals want our banking information instantaneously. So how do we make sure that we're accessing that data in a way that's in a really low latency environment? So those are some of the challenges that we're seeing, but it's really driven by a massive shift in human behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. Those changing customer requirements and the speed of those changing customer requirements is hugely challenging. Randy, let's come to you. Where do you see the biggest challenges, or perhaps the biggest drivers for the change that we're seeing?
Yeah, so I would just echo what Briana said. Certainly, changes in human behavior, either forced in the case of the sort of pandemic or organic. There's an expectation on the part of end users and consumers of information about performance, availability, sovereignty, security, all those things that we sort of take for granted now. That wasn't necessarily the case, even a few years ago, right? So certainly, human behavior plays a big role. From my perspective, as kind of a technologist or a platform engineering oriented, focal point, the customers we deal with on a regular basis, the challenges they're confronting are once they've identified that need, that demand that they want to fill with their solutions, they then set about trying to build out an architecture to support it, right? So a lot of these new next generation cloud native applications are being containerized and deployed as microservices, which puts a whole different set of pressures on existing infrastructure, and it requires a shift towards a more multi-cloud or true hybrid multi-cloud architecture. So invariably what happens is organizations will kind of start some pilot projects and they'll bring in, Red Hat OpenShift, for example, very popular in the enterprise. They'll develop a pilot project or an MVP program, which will go really well. But then as they start to migrate and scale that to global production deployments, they start to bump up against some vulnerabilities and issues with their existing infrastructure, sometimes, unexpectedly. So you got this countervailing pressure of the demand and the need to modernize bumping up against limitations inherent in some of these legacy architectures that sometimes, unfortunately, manifest at the wrong times, when you're ready to roll into production. So we find that helping customers navigate that migration and that journey with technology solutions like OpenShift, like IBM Fusion and other technologies that are optimized to go from pilot to production, helps overcome a lot of those issues, right? So, in working with our colleagues on the cloud team and the software teams, we can swap into those opportunities and really help not only understand and measure those challenges, but overcome them with solutions that are designed to scale and deploy very large global scale and deliver seamless and sort of nonstop service levels.
Yeah, thanks, Randy. Two kind of challenges that you've both touched upon there. One, this idea of how we scale up and how we overcome this challenge of technical debt, legacy technology, and moving from the past to the future-proofing what we're implementing now as well, so it doesn't become the technical debt of the future. I'd be interested to get some thoughts on best practice for doing that, because this seems to be really where the rubber hits the road for many of the firms here that we've been speaking to this week. This idea of scaling up and this idea of overcoming that idea of technical debt. Let's maybe come to you first, Randy, with that one, if we can.
Sure. So it's a great question, and it's something we hear, daily from our clients and our partners. So there's a lot of different answers to that question. It's a complicated domain to kind of dig into. I think if I could kind of go up a level and simplify it, the first response to that question or that problem domain is standardization, right? So the ability to future-proof your environment is heavily dependent upon the kinds of standards that you adopt, because the last thing you want to be doing is implementing a lot of proprietary stacks or proprietary closed ecosystem technologies. It just makes it more limiting for what you're able to do in the future. So going back to using Red Hat OpenShift as an example, it's all open standards based. It's built on Kubernetes. It's built on Docker. It's very high fidelity adoption of S3 standards, for example. So when you implement a solution built on open standards, you give yourself the flexibility and openness to adopt any one, from 1,000 different or thousands of different open source and commercial, software technologies, right? So you're not locking yourself into a given architecture. And it's the very same thing with the cloud team, and I'll hand it to Briana to give her thoughts. But we're providing open architectures that are designed to be future-proof, right? They're built from the bare metal to be future-proof and to allow that flexibility and that broad aperture of available solutions going forward for our customers.
Yeah, thanks, Randy. Well, Briana, that feels like a good point to hand over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great point. When you talk to developers, they just want to write code. They just want to innovate, and they just want to push new code into production every single day. And what hinders them from doing that is operations, technical debt, even security. And what we found with our clients, as much as 80% of the development cycles are being tied up in operations, technical debt, and security. So how do you get how do you offload that 80% so the developers can just push more code every single day? And that's really the crux of the problem, and that's what we try to help our clients solve. And some of that could be planning and making sure that you're planning in such a way that you're not going to instantly accrue technical debt, because it can happen very quickly. But then the other thing, and I think Randy touched on this, is about consistency. The more consistent you can deploy your workloads, the better, because you don't want to have, it's really interesting how folks don't realize, like, they're already on many different clouds and they're on prem, but they don't realize the amount of work it takes to manage a workload in a very proprietary, custom way that takes up time, and time that you could be doing something else. So anything that you can automate or do it consistently, and I think that's the value of something like OpenShift, where you can manage and operate it consistently across many different environments. You're not having to learn, there's not a lot of anomalies. You can do that very consistently, and you can patch that and automate it. You can upgrade to the latest version in a very consistent way. And that's offloading a ton of work. And if you think about it, we've done a lot of studies in this area around like TCO and just the amount of time it takes to just patch one specific environment. It's incredible. And so the more we can offload and we can roll things out in a consistent way, the better our developers are going to be able to perform for us.
Yeah, thanks both. One of the things I want to touch upon is this idea of balance, and how we kind of find that balance between innovating, providing organizations with the flexibility to innovate, whilst also doing so in a secure way, meeting compliance regulations, meeting their legal obligations. How do we kind of strike that balance? How do we get the best of both worlds, innovation and this, kind of, I guess, the control of that, the safety net, if you like, of those kind of guardrails?
Yeah, another really good question. And to some degree, a lot of what you're describing is really integration work, right? So any environment or any organization that's looking to modernize is not just going to magically throw the switch and have every one of their workloads, be fully containerized and fully portable and multi-cloud. There's always going to be those kind of legacy long tail workloads that are gradually going to migrate, into a cloud first or a cloud native, environment or design pattern. But during that interim period, before they get fully refactored or lifted and shifted, they have to be managed and integrated. So a lot of the security and performance and availability and observability requirements that are, wrapped up in that integration effort have to be managed by your platform, right? So again, going back to the foundational platform, whichever cloud you opt to deploy on, or whether you're a mix of on-prem and cloud, which most organizations are, it goes back to standards, right? You want to make sure that you have, definable, well-supported, well-documented standards so that when you deploy new services or when you develop an integration framework, that the data at rest and in motion is encrypted and secured, that all your endpoints are secured, that you have a very robust and very resilient cyber defense mechanism, and multi-layer defense mechanism in place. One of the big advantages of being part of IBM, I think from both of our perspectives, is that IBM has also, in addition to what we do, the world's leading security practice. So when we encounter security challenges or opportunities in our client base, we work very closely with our partners in the security team to implement best practices and to cross-pollinate, between and among the brands. So we are able to deploy very differentiated security services and offerings that are directly addressing those issues around performance, scale, security, sovereignty, and kind of all the things that you mentioned.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Thanks, Randy. Same question to you then, Briana. Obviously, firms want control. They want an element of oversight. They also want the flexibility and the ability to innovate. How do we find that balance?
Yeah, it is not just they want, they have to have that flexibility if they're going to move at the pace that they need to move. And I'll give an example. We've worked with Mines Hospital during the pandemic. They were faced with a situation where they had to roll out the vaccine to their constituents, and they had to do so in appointments in an interval of 2, which had really never been done before. They never needed appointments, so many weeks apart, and so they needed a quick app where they could roll this out to their patients, and then also have a mechanism where they could do the COVID testing and then get that out to their patients instantaneously. because of course everybody wants an immediate answer. So we had to figure out how to build an app with them. But the thing is, they're in Europe, so they've got incredible GDPR regulations. They've also got all kinds of additional health compliance to manage. And so how do you build something super quick within days, and then also keep all that data safe? So we used a product, IBM Cloud Satellite, to extend the cloud into their on-prem environment. And so they were able to take advantage of things like Kubernetes and our cloud services and build the app very quickly, but they could keep all that data on-prem and it never left the site. And then they could comply with the really strict European compliance standards. So that's an example of where you have to have that hybrid flexibility just to be able to really survive in this environment where there's going to be new challenges that we're going to face every single day, and then how do we rise to the occasion?
Yeah, great. Many thanks both. So listen, we ran a poll earlier in the day around some of the challenges that folks are facing with regards to their digital transformation efforts. Perhaps I can pull the findings up and get you to discuss some of those results, how they resonate with you. So let's maybe take a quick look at those results now, if we can, Lucy and team. So there we go. What is your top challenge when delivering on your transformation initiatives? A pretty even spread of results there, I guess, which speaks to the multiple challenges that folks are facing. Budget perennially is down there at 34%. We've got stakeholder buy-in, at 37%, 26% for speed to market. Security, compliance also gets a reference. Skills get a reference. There's a kind of a lot going on here. Let's maybe get some thoughts from you folks on this. Challenges on multiple fronts, but certainly budget and stakeholder buy-in are the two big winners there, or losers, depending on which angle you're approaching it from. Briana, let's come to you.
I think this is fascinating as a product manager, because the stakeholder buy-in is such a classic problem for any product manager. So I think there's a lot of PMs out in the world smiling at this. But I think what happens is it reflects the conflicting needs of all of your constituents within a company, right? So you've got developers are concerned about one thing, you've got your CISO that's concerned about something else. You've got all of these different individuals that need, you might have your sales team that needs a feature. So I think it really articulates the real scenarios that we're all having to deal with, and then what is that prioritization going to look like, and really being able to articulate the outcomes for each of these features. Like, which comes first? And those are the really hard things to solve. And I feel like that's it's almost like a negotiation or it's a design thinking session for sure, but it's something that you really have to make sure that you're making fair trade-offs. And I think also it's really good to have a diverse set of individuals, like with different backgrounds and different education types coming to the table, so you don't have all of the same archetype coming to the table with their demands, so to speak. So I think it's a really interesting problem. It's one of my favorite ones to tackle.
Yeah, thanks, Briana. Randy, yes.
Yeah, sorry, I totally agree. I mean, I think it really is it's always a fascinating process to go through. There were really no surprises on the survey results you showed there. The one thing that surprised me a little bit was I expected to see skills maybe up a little higher, because clearly, as we talk to a lot of clients about modernization and transformation of their IT infrastructure and their workload stack, the developers, Kubernetes developers, DevOps people, platform engineers, SRE folks are not exactly falling from trees. They're kind of hard to find. They're a scarce resource. So, but the rest of the things were, certainly predictable and things that we deal with on a regular basis. But I would, again, echo what Briana said. It's very, very important to get all these different constituents together as early as possible in the process. One of the things that we tell, our partners and our consultants and our folks is, when you engage in a modernization discussion, whether it's driven by a specific initiative or just more broadly as part of a strategic planning session, you really want to make sure that you're speaking to the right people. So we're no longer just going in selling to the sysadmin or the network admin or the storage admin or the cloud procurement team. It's really a cross-functional team. To Briana's point, a diverse team of people from lots of different groups with lots of different points of view, lots of different requirements. And it's really beneficial to get them together as early in the process as you can, rather than, getting to the 10-yard line and then realizing all of a sudden that you completely missed out on, the security team or the GDPR compliance team or whatever the case may be. So, get everyone together early and often, build the consensus, make sure you understand everybody's requirements. I think from our perspective, one of the real values that we bring to the table is kind of the experience. I mean, we've been doing this literally for 120 years, so we're pretty good at it. We kind of understand how to map out the process, make sure the right constituents are involved in the decision making and the planning, and then executing on that plan at scale. So it's not easy to do, and it's something that requires a lot of forethought. So great question and great survey results.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too when I'm talking to clients. A lot of time, I think 10 years ago, everybody was really transitioning into an agile culture. And now when I hear clients are really focused on prioritization, that's the new thing, and really having strong product management skills. And then how do you prioritize? Because I think that is a very common theme that I see in the industry, is that you have all of these requirements and then what comes first. So I think that's the next we're encroaching on this next era where there's too many things, and how do you prioritize? So I think it's a good time to be a product manager.
Yeah, great stuff. Thanks both. I guess on that subject of prioritization, there's an element of having to prioritize, workloads for different environments, how to decide, what to work on next, but also where to work on that, which resource is best placed to handle those particular workloads. How are you seeing organizations make those decisions, evaluate, more effectively, I guess, where they want to place particular workloads?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, certainly cost is a key driver, right? So if they're looking at, for example, an on-prem workload that is, using very fit for purpose infrastructure that's maybe legacy and been around for a while, as they start looking at having to refresh that infrastructure, there are events like that which trigger the opportunity to consider lifting that and potentially moving it to cloud, which, may or may not make sense. If it makes, economic sense and it makes operational sense, but it also meets your security requirements, then that's an obvious motion, right, to move those workloads to the cloud. However, likewise, on the flip side of that, there are workloads that maybe get initially pushed to the cloud, but quickly end up getting repatriated back on-prem for a variety of reasons. It could be ingress and egress cost, it could be performance, it could be security, it could be cross-functional requirements, integration requirements. So you need the flexibility to be able to sort of scope the workload, and our consulting group works very closely with both of our teams to develop very sophisticated best practices and modeling around that, right? So they can understand, by gathering some basic information from a customer and a client, okay, what are the most likely candidates? And again, prioritization, as Briana mentioned, key element of it. Let's look at the top 2 or 3 workloads that are the best candidates for either lift and shift to the cloud or potentially to be repatriated back on-prem from the cloud, for example. And let's do those first and begin to develop a TCO model and look at the economic and operational characteristics of those and how they behave, post-transition. So, there's a lot of factors that work into it, but, those are a few that come to mind right away.
Yeah, thanks, Randy. Briana, not all workloads are created equal. So how are you seeing firms tackle that challenge?
Yeah, no, I'd have to echo that. I mean, of course, it's about, your own privacy and government regulations in terms of where the data can live, but it's also about cost. And I think what we're going to see in the future, it might even be about sustainability. Where should the workload live based on where it's best for your carbon output? So I think that's kind of an interesting flavor that we're going to see in the future. But yeah, and I think the other thing to think about is what are the impacts of moving a workload? Like, how integral is that to the rest of your business? And I think a lot of the easy things have moved. Now you're talking about workloads that are very, very heavily integrated into the backend systems, and moving one thing has a lot of implications. So I think we're getting into the more complex parts of most enterprises, and then that's where it gets really tricky.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Thanks, Briana. Thanks, Randy. So Lucy tells me that we've got a couple of questions coming through from the audience now. So maybe we'll go to our first audience question at this point. And I think that comes from Brian over at GDIT. Lovely to have you with us, Brian. Thanks so much for joining us.
Great, thanks for a very insightful discussion, Briana and Randy. And I liked your prioritization and workload location discussions. And as we've been looking at the US federal government, they've been moving from a cloud first to cloud smart to now what we're calling from a GDIT perspective, cloud expected kind of journey. We've been shifting our dialogue from cloud ops, which tends to be a technical discussion, to FinOps, which really gets back to the business value. And I didn't know if you're seeing a similar trend in your discussions.
Yeah, no question about it. Every customer we talk to now is going through that journey, right, where they're no longer just explicitly by default choosing cloud first. I mean, that was very attractive and fashionable kind of 5 or 6 years ago, but now it is very much about cost optimization, and that is a function not only of, placement and where you patriate your workloads, but it goes even beyond that now. We're seeing organizations that are actually taking their more cloud native or cloud first workloads and actually shopping them around to multiple providers to get the best value. So it's gone even beyond, mobility between and among clouds to really cost optimized placement, which can change over time. And I'm sure, Brianna, you're probably seeing this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's an interesting thing to look at, because it's so complex. So you could just look at your bill and say, all right, where should this workload live based on my, infrastructure charges? But I think that what we're seeing is that a lot of folks are going a layer deeper and saying, okay, what is it really going to cost me to run this? Is this just a Snowflake deployment that's very different than the rest of my, all of the other workloads that I have? And if it is, what's the cost of that? Like, is that actually a security, potential security breach in the making, because we're kind of managing this in a special Snowflake way? So I think that is the new conversation. Is like, what is the lack of consistency going to cost me in the long run? So I think that's like interesting kind of twist on the conversation.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, thanks both. Great question, Brian. Lovely to have you up here as well. Good to see you. So we have another question from the audience at this point. We've got Bart from DigExplore. Hi there, Bart. Great to see you again.
Hi, this more is a question for Randy. As the digital officers, we are pushing the business and IT both to move in terms of becoming agile, leverage the cloud-based capabilities the fastest way. But there is a conundrum here, because our core business functionality resides in our mainframes and the mainframe ecosystem-based apps, which are run typically in all large enterprises in their private data centers they run. And if you push the CIO and ask, what is the primary focus area for you? The answer most often is going to be, we are here to build business solutions. Data center is something they had to do because they had to do. So two scenarios, I would like your opinion where you see the world moving into. Scenario one, which as a digital officers we dream about, is every compute workload we need is already in the mainframe, in the clouds out there. And as a digital officer, all we are worried about is marshalling the business service components through APIs and events to string together a solution quickly. But that requires the mainframes and the lock, stock, and barrel, the entire replication infrastructure of dual mainframes within 15-mile zones that we have that running in that combination. Do you see that coming over to the public cloud as well? Or do you are forsaken to just say you got to keep running your domestic on-prem data centers because you have your prime assets of mainframe running there, and do your rest of the stuff outside? Do they come together at all on the cloud? Mainframe and the cloud?
Yeah, great question. The short answer is yes, they definitely do, and we have many large, customers with huge mainframe estates. I think, as people may or may not know, the vast majority of the 100 largest banks in the world run all of their core, critical financial transaction applications on the mainframe for a bunch of reasons. It's incredibly reliable, it's incredibly fast, it's all the things that we know it to be. However, there is still this constant pressure to repatriate sensible workloads, prioritized appropriately to the cloud. So there's a couple different ways that kind of plays out. It's either an integration discussion where your mainframes remain on-prem, and you have the data center and the sovereignty of the mainframe, which is integrated into the cloud, depending on which APIs, or you might use a messaging framework or an integration framework like Cloud Pak for integration, for instance. Or there are cases where the mainframe is actually physically being placed in either a colo or a regional data center. I know Briana can talk about this as well. So both options are happening. We're seeing it happen in real time with our customers today. What's interesting to me, just a quick observation opinion, there are those who predicted that by now the mainframe would have been completely supplanted by these massive grid architectures in the cloud. That hasn't happened. It's not going to be happening anytime in the near future. So that's an interesting point. We're going to be living in this bifurcated world, I think, for some amount of time, which is good because both are optimized for the appropriate models they're supporting. I don't know, Briana, if you want to add to that. But
yeah, no, I think that's exactly what we're seeing, especially with this concept of sovereign cloud becoming such an important factor for many of our clients. I think that the mainframe is, if nothing else, growing more than ever because the demands are there. And so I think these two models are going to have to come closer and closer together and coexist. And I think you'll see that more and more.
Yeah, great stuff. Thanks both. Thanks for the question, Bart. Lovely to see you again. Great stuff. Okay, well, folks, we're almost at time. Maybe I can just get some quick thoughts from you on where you see the space headed next. You've started to touch upon in that last answer, but what's going to be the big trend that you're going to see in 2023? What should we all looking out for? Briana, let's maybe start with you.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that AI everywhere is definitely is the future. I mean, it's so incredible just to, a lot of folks are playing with OpenAI and other tools just for fun, but applying this to business is really interesting. And I think I mentioned before, you could start, it's not out of the realm of possibility to think about where workload should run based on cost, security, based on data residency, based on things like sustainability. And so I think that we'll see more of that. And then also this concept of automation around helping us with security and making sure that things are patched, they're compliant. We'll see way more of that in 2023. And then I think also, additional accessibility to quantum computing. I think that's going to be it's always a fun thing to talk about, but making that more accessible for more use cases, I think is on the cusp of happening.
Yeah, thanks, Briana. Randy, let's come to you. Hopefully, Briana hasn't stolen your thunder. Where do you see some of the biggest, most exciting trends for this year?
Yeah, so everything Briana said, plus, and she's right on with all those things. Quantum is a really interesting one for me as well, and I think. Quantum remains kind of ephemeral. Like it's something that's a little abstract for a lot of people. It's abstract for me, and I've been through a bunch of briefings. But it is, however, becoming more. I don't want to say widely deployed, but it's becoming. Briana used the right point. Accessible. It's becoming more accessible. We're making tremendous strides forward in capacity and performance, and in application. So it is quickly migrating from the realm of theoretical and academic to solving real, actual business and operational problems. So it's really, really amazing. We're actually, I think, the next generation quantum system is due to be released, I think, early next year, and it's going to, do some really, really fascinating things. So that's a fun space to watch. AI also, absolutely. AI is not only becoming more common in the enterprise, it is becoming increasingly an embedded technology, right? So everybody on this call has a smartphone, presumably, that has incredibly sophisticated computational photography, pattern recognition, LiDAR, all this sensor input that's processed in real time. That's driving a couple of really interesting phenomena. Number one is obviously 5G, so ultra high bandwidth, communications at the edge, which is itself also then driving additional edge capabilities. So, we talk to customers every day that are moving beyond not just having an automated, factory floor, for example, or an automated sensor array, but they're using, increasingly what's being called zero ops. They stand up an edge facility. It might be temporary. It might be there for a week or two. That is fully automated, fully enclosed, fully encapsulated, and fully autonomous. It does what it needs to do. It gathers all the data it needs to gather. It periodically pushes it back to, an intermediary site somewhere. Autonomous vehicles do this essentially today. They'll increasingly be doing it in the future. So edge plus 5G plus AI is driving just some incredible, very, very sophisticated and very powerful workloads, which interestingly is also driving a lot of interesting ethical questions, right? Because obviously as we get closer and closer to having these incredibly capable, increasingly autonomous edge workloads and use cases, there's privacy issues, there's, data security issues, there's, again, a lot of really interesting ethical and moral questions. IBM has a whole group of people that are focused on ethical computing and ethical use of AI. We have an executive board that vets all of the opportunities that we explore for AI against those criteria. So that's interesting. The last thing I'll mention is the hosted control plane. So that one of the earlier questions, I think it was Brian who asked the question about, multi-cloud and find FinOps and financially optimized and workload optimized deployments. The challenge, or one of the biggest challenges of that environment or that future state, is the ability to have a single control plane that manages all of those regardless of where they are, right? Regardless of where they're physically placed, which cloud they're on, which, one of your data centers they reside in. So kind of the holy grail is this idea of a hosted control plane that can manage all of that from one place. We are not there yet. However, our Briana's research counterparts in the cloud team are doing some absolutely amazing work, working with our colleagues at Red Hat on the idea of hosted control plane. And I think you're going to see, without, violating any NDAs, you're going to see some really, really interesting things coming out later this year on that front and going into next year that are going to be kind of mind-blowing in terms of what we can deliver. So yeah, those are the things that I kind of see as coming in the next, 12 to 18 months, although the horizon of certainty is much shorter these days than it used to be. But
yeah, fantastic stuff. Watch this space. We'll have to hear from you this time next year, and you can report back on progress. Briana, Randy, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Lovely speaking to you both.
thank you. Great discussion.